1849. 300,000 men left everything for California, farms and families. Most carried less than 40 pounds. There was no doctor and no clean water. 1 in 5 died within the year. But some made it. Not the strongest, not the richest, but the ones who paid attention. The ones who learned tricks that cost nothing, just a handful of pine needles, a strip of rawhide, and a fistful of charcoal. These are 15 lost gold rush survival tricks the 49ers used that nobody remembers. Everyone worked. By the end of this video, you will know all 15, and you will never look at the wilderness the same way again. Now, before we dive in, tap that subscribe button. You will not want to miss what is coming next. Number 15. Pine needle tea for scurvy. Miners who knew this trick brewed tea from pine needles. It prevented and reversed scurvy. That disease killed an estimated 10,000 men in the California gold fields. Scurvy was devastating in the camps. At its peak in early 1850, records at Sutter's Fort noted 18 to 20 men dying per day, many from land scurvy brought on by a lack of fresh vegetables. Prospectors survived on severely limited diets. The food that kept longest had no vitamin C. Fresh fruit rotted on the trail. Vegetables were almost impossible to find in the mountains. The body fell apart without that one missing nutrient. Teeth loosened, gums bled, old wounds reopened as if they had never healed. Many miners turned to popular medicines of the time: opium, mercury, quinine, and castor oil. A few tried something different. They watched what the Miwok people did, and they watched what the old mountain trappers did. They drank tea made from pine needles. They steeped a handful of green needles from a ponderosa or sugar pine in a tin cup of boiled water. Bitter, resinous. It smelled like the forest floor after rain. The men who learned this lived. The men who did not rotted where they stood. Sometimes the difference was just a tin cup of bitter tea. Number 14. The bacon grease lamp. Miners saved their bacon grease and burned it in tin cans for light. A cotton wick, a can, a spoonful of rendered fat, and you had a lamp. The spouted tin fat lamp provided more illumination than a candle. It looked somewhat like a little coffee pot with a wick along the long spout. The fat lamp stood 2 to 4 inches in height. One of the main drawbacks was the smell. Animal fat was the usual fuel, and the light came accompanied by a foul odor that clung to everything in the tent. But bacon was the staple food of the mining camps. Bacon, beans, and coffee could be purchased for a reasonable price, at least in the early days. Every miner saved the drippings. Lard was used as axle grease and as fuel for lamps. The same tin of grease did 3 jobs. The tent smelled like fried pork all night. The flame guttered in the draft. The light it threw was amber, unsteady, enough to see a hand of cards or mend a torn shirt. The modern camping industry sells emergency candles for $8 apiece. That 49er had a dozen of them in his grease tin, and he made breakfast from the same supply. Number 13. Hardtack. The bread that lasted forever. Flour, water, and a pinch of salt. Rolled flat. Baked twice until every drop of moisture was gone, iron hard like a roof tile. Miners called it sheet iron. Sailors called it worm castles because weevils burrowed in. You could not bite it. You broke it with a rifle butt or a rock. Soaked it in coffee until it softened into something like a thick porridge. Fried it in bacon grease if you had any. The weevils floated to the top of the coffee. You skimmed them off, or you did not. One miner wrote home about eating hard bread half-cooked with salt pork and the occasional salmon purchased from the Indians. A 50-pound barrel of hardtack lasted a single miner 3 to 4 months. No expiration date, no refrigeration, no packaging. A recipe so simple, a child could make it, and it sustained 300,000 men across 2,000 miles of wilderness. The food industry now spends billions engineering shelf-stable products. The 49ers solved it with flour and an oven. Number 12. Flour paste as a wound dressing. When a man cut himself with a pick or an axe, and there was no doctor within 100 miles, he packed the wound with a paste made from flour and water. Sometimes it was mixed with charcoal or a splash of vinegar. There were only 3 doctors in San Francisco when the rush began. Most were poorly trained, if trained at all. They could provide little more than their medieval-era predecessors. These were the days before germ theory. A handful of flour from the supply sack, enough water to make a thick paste, pressed into the wound, wrapped with a strip of cotton torn from a shirt tail. The paste dried hard, formed a seal, and slowed the bleeding. Some men added wood ash or powdered charcoal, which drew infection. While not identical to the highly processed activated charcoal used in modern hospitals for poisoning, the principle was the same, using carbon to draw out impurities. At Bidwell's store, the medicine shelf stocked Seidlitz powders, Brandreth's pills, bicarbonate of soda, castor oil, and lime juice. But those cost gold dust, and they ran out fast. He did not know why it worked. He only knew that the man in the next claim had done the same thing and still had both hands. That was enough. Those flour paste dressings kept infection from spreading, but infection was only one threat. Dirty water killed more miners than any blade ever did. Number 11. Reading the river. Experienced miners could read a river the way a sailor reads the sky. Not for gold, for survival, where the water ran clean, where to ford safely, where to camp above the flood line. Fast-moving water over rocks was safer to drink than still water. Still pools bred mosquitoes and cholera. Moss growing on the upstream side of boulders told you which way was north. A river that looked gentle in September could rip a man off his feet in December when the rains came down from the Sierra. Health conditions were frightful. 1/3 of all deaths were caused by diarrhea and dysentery. Malnutrition, scurvy, malaria, and typhus fever were also prevalent. Bad water caused half of it. The Miwok and Nisenan peoples knew these rivers. The miners who listened to them lived longer than the ones who did not. The skill was in the eyes. You could not buy it at the general store. A man either learned to see what the river was telling him, or the river taught him the hard way. Number 10. Wet rawhide repairs. A miner soaked a strip of rawhide in water, wrapped it wet around a broken tool handle or cracked gunstock, and let it dry. As it dried, it shrank tighter than iron bands. One antique rifle was found with a cracked wrist, repaired with rawhide sewn tightly in place, and it was holding rather well, even many years later. Gold pans that cost 20 cents before 1849 were soon sold for $8 each. A broken shovel handle was not something you replaced. You fixed it with whatever you had, and rawhide served more than one purpose. In the early days of mining, when no water was obtainable, the richest dirt was placed on a rawhide, laid on the ground for sorting. Same rawhide, different job. Nothing had only one use. 200 miles from the nearest blacksmith. No hardware store. No replacement parts. Just a strip of hide, a pot of water, and the knowledge that what dries will hold. Something is emerging here. Every one of these tricks has the same quality. Not one of them is clever. Not one of them is complicated. They are obvious once you see them. Pine needles are everywhere. Bacon grease is left over from breakfast. Rawhide comes from the deer you shot for dinner. These men did not invent anything. They just paid attention. That was the whole trick, and it is the one thing no survival kit on Earth can sell you. Number 9. The gold pan as kitchen. The same pan a miner used to sift gold from river gravel during the day was his frying pan, mixing bowl, and dinner plate at night. A shallow iron or tin pan, 12 to 16 inches across, with sloping sides. He fried salt pork in it at dawn and panned gold in it until dark. He mixed biscuit dough in it by firelight. Nobody owned two pans. A man's entire kitchen was a gold pan, a tin cup, and a knife. The pan was sometimes the only piece of equipment a miner carried from Independence, Missouri, to the American River, 2,000 miles on horseback or on foot. One pan. He did not separate his life into categories. Work and food came from the same vessel. That was not poverty, that was efficiency. The first lesson the gold rush taught was this: everything you own has to earn its weight. Number 8. Charcoal water filtration. Miners burned wood to charcoal, crushed it, and layered it with sand and gravel in a cloth bag or a trouser leg. They poured muddy stream water in at the top, and clear water came out the bottom. Use hardwood charcoal from the campfire, broken to pieces with a rock. Start with a layer of small gravel at the bottom, then a layer of sand, then a thick layer of charcoal, and a final layer of sand at the top. Pack the whole thing into a cotton sack or, when nothing else is available, a leg cut from a worn-out pair of trousers. Sanitation was poor across the camps, leading to widespread dysentery and cholera. Clean water was the difference between working the next morning and dying in a ditch. One physician observer estimated that from 1851 to 1853, one of every 5 persons reaching California died within 6 months of arrival. The Brita filter in your kitchen uses granular activated charcoal. It costs $8 a cartridge. That 49er made his from a dead campfire and a torn pair of pants. The chemistry has not changed. The price has. Number 7. Vinegar as the camp medicine chest. A bottle of vinegar served as wound wash, digestive remedy, fever reducer, and cleaning agent. One bottle, a dozen uses: apple cider vinegar or plain white vinegar, when a miner could get it. Splashed on a wound before the flour paste went on. Sipped in water for stomach cramps. Rubbed on the skin to cool a fever. At Bidwell's store on a shopping trip to Sacramento, the proprietor bought lime juice, castor oil, olive oil, and other remedies. But vinegar was the one item that did not run out, because you could make it from any alcohol that had gone bad. A bottle of turned wine was not waste. It was medicine. The wellness industry now sells apple cider vinegar tonics for $14 a bottle with a label that says detox. The 49ers did not need the label. Nobody could patent vinegar. That was the problem then. It is the problem now. Number 6. Chewing willow bark for pain. When a miner's teeth ached, or his joints swelled, or a broken finger throbbed through the night, he stripped bark from a willow tree and chewed it. The bark contains salicin, which the body converts to salicylic acid, the natural precursor to what Bayer synthesized into aspirin in 1899. Willow trees grew along every creek and river in the Sierra foothills. A strip peeled with a knife, chewed slowly, bitter. Woody, the taste of tree bark and river mud. The pain eased within the hour. Not gone. Blunted. Enough to work. Native peoples had used willow bark for centuries. Bark medicine was old knowledge. Missionaries in Peru had discovered similar curative effects from the cinchona tree 300 years earlier. The 49ers who listened to the native peoples had something the others did not. A night's sleep. No doctor for 100 miles. No pharmacy. No prescription. Just a tree that grew by the water and a knife sharp enough to peel it. The pharmacy was the riverbank, and it did not charge. There is a pattern in all of this worth naming. Every trick on this list required a man to slow down, to look at what was already around him. The pine needles were on the ground. The willow bark was at the creek. Not one of these things had to be ordered, shipped, or purchased. The gold rush was a frenzy. The ones who survived were the ones who stopped long enough to look down. Number 5. Tallow and pine pitch for waterproofing. Miners waterproofed their boots, their canvas, and their rope by rubbing them with a mixture of animal fat and pine resin, heated together over a fire. Rendered tallow is beef fat or pork fat, cooked down to a thick paste. Pine pitch came from wounded bark on any conifer. Miners warmed the two together in a tin cup over the fire and then applied the warm mixture to boot leather in long, slow strokes with their fingers, working it into the seams. You can almost smell the pine resin and hot grease in the cold evening air. The same mixture sealed the seams of canvas tents, coated rope to prevent rotting, and even made a crude adhesive for patching holes. Boots were expensive in the camps. Coarse pairs could not be purchased for less than $30 to $40 per pair, while superior ones sold for more than $100. A man who made $20 on a good day treated a $100 pair of boots like they were alive, because in a way they were all that stood between him and the frozen ground. You did not let a pair of boots rot in the mud. You waterproofed them, or you went barefoot in December. Number 4. The bandana, 1 square of cotton, 12 survival uses: water filter, dust mask, tourniquet, pot holder, sling for a broken arm, sweatband, napkin, signal flag, bag for carrying, face shade, wound wrap, and neck protection from the sun. A yard of cotton, cut square, hemmed or not. Red was common. You could see it in the brush. Blue was practical. It did not show the dirt. Tied over the nose and mouth when the dry wind whipped dust through the diggings. Dipped in the creek and tied around the neck on a 100-degree afternoon. Folded thick to grab the handle of a coffee pot off the fire. Wrapped tight above a wound to slow the bleeding until someone could get there with a needle and thread. Cost 5 cents at a general store back east. In the gold camps, maybe a quarter. Nobody called it a multi-tool. Nobody marketed it. It was a handkerchief, and it did more than any gadget that has come since. Number 3. Whiskey as everything. A bottle of whiskey in a mining camp was antiseptic, anesthetic, trade currency, warmth, and morale, all in one corked container. It could be poured on a wound before stitching it shut with a sail needle and horsehair. It was given in mouthfuls to a man before someone set his broken bone. It was traded straight for supplies when gold dust was too fine to weigh. Simple items like eggs and slices of bread were sold for $1 apiece in 1849. Whiskey was worth more by the ounce than most food. It was the only painkiller most miners ever knew. It was the only antiseptic they trusted. It was the only warmth on a night when the fire had burned down and the wind came off the snow. Camp doctors were among the flood of 49ers. Many came not to practice medicine, but to strike it rich. They soon learned medicine was less physically demanding, safer, and more profitable than mining. When those doctors operated, whiskey was the anesthesia. It was not drinking. It was medicine. It was currency. It was the last thing a man tasted before someone cut a bullet out of his leg with a hunting knife. The line between vice and survival was thinner than people remember. Number 2. The buddy system. Miners who partnered up survived. Miners who worked alone died. Not from mining, from everything else. By having a group, miners could use bigger strategies and make investments together on tools that made them more efficient. But it was about more than efficiency. You fell sick, your partner cooked. You broke a leg, your partner rode for help. You died in the night, your partner wrote the letter home. Only 40,000 of the estimated 90,000 49ers who left the East Coast actually made it to California. The rest turned back or died on the way. Life in the goldfields exposed the miner to loneliness and homesickness, isolation and physical danger, bad food and illness, and even death. Men formed companies before they left home. They signed articles of agreement. They pooled their money for supplies. The company was not a business arrangement. It was an insurance policy written in handshakes. Men died alone. That was the single most reliable predictor of death in the gold fields. Not disease, not starvation, solitude. A partner did not just watch your claim, he watched your breathing at 3 in the morning. That was worth more than gold. A partner kept you alive day to day. But there was one trick, the most intimate, the most forgotten, that kept the whole camp alive through the winter. And it started with a handful of flour and the heat of a man's own body. Number 1. The sourdough starter, kept alive against the body. Miners carried a living sourdough starter in a pouch around their neck or tucked against their skin. If it died, they had no bread. If they had no bread, they starved. The starters were fiercely guarded. On cold nights, miners slept with them pressed to their bodies to keep the yeast alive. Commercial leavening was unreliable in the conditions they faced. Sourdough was not. Flour, water, time, and warmth. The warmth came from the man himself. These starters were considered so valuable they were sometimes used as collateral for loans. It was believed that the fortune of the starter was tied to the fortune of the man. Old hands came to be called sourdoughs, a term still applied to any Alaskan or Klondike old-timer. The San Francisco sourdough tradition began officially with the opening of Boudin Bakery in 1849. That bakery has used the same starter ever since. When the 1906 earthquake hit, Louise Boudin saved a bucket of the mother dough before she saved anything else. Sourdough's appeal was simple: easy preparation, long shelf life, adaptable to primitive conditions. The yeast fed on the flour. The man fed on the bread. One kept the other alive. A man in the Sierra Nevada, January of 1850. Snow to his waist, no supply wagon for weeks. He pulls the pouch from inside his shirt. The dough is warm. It smells of yeast and sweat and cotton. He feeds it a pinch of flour, tucks it back against his chest. He is keeping something alive so it can keep him alive. That is not baking. That is a covenant. And the word sourdough meant you had survived. 15 tricks. Not one from a store and not one from a manual. Pine needles, bacon grease, willow bark, and rawhide. 300,000 men crossed a continent on nothing but attention. The land will feed you, clothe you, and heal you, if you listen. And somewhere right now, in a bakery in San Francisco, a sourdough starter that was born in 1849 is still alive. Still being fed, still rising. The miners are gone. The thing they kept alive is not. If you want more forgotten wisdom from the generations who came before us, the next video is waiting for you right now.